We're here. We're going to momentarily, both of us, start our copies of the first live-action Transformers movie by Michael Bay. We're going to be doing a commentary on that one, much like we did with Infinity War. Unlike that movie, I have not seen this one a bajillion times. This will be the first time in a long while that I've actually sat down with this movie in particular. So I don't know how I'm going to feel about it. This is generally the one of the franchise that people are most willing to admit is good or close to a good movie. Uh, Me not having the best memory of it, I'm gonna try and see what I can pick up on with us, talking over it. But yeah, this is gonna be a fun little experiment, I think.
Yeah, same. And I have a lot of love for this movie that reasons we'll get into um, that don't necessarily like tie to it as a film, but I do think this is a pretty solid, pretty fun little movie. And it did kind of push us into like what the blockbuster would become for almost a solid decade.
That's actually, yeah, it's one of those things that you don't really think about just because it's been the norm for so long, but how much of, I'd say even still to this day, modern blockbusters can be traced back to this movie specifically.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, we'll point all that out as we go. So you ready to begin?
Okay, yeah, we're doing this on now, right? One, two, three, and then on now we'll hit play.
Yep.
All right, here we
And
go.
if you have your own copy and you want to watch along, feel free to do that as well.
All right, one, two, three, now.
Okay. And for some reason, I always forget, like, this is technically a DreamWorks product.
I've never really forgotten that since it's at the beginning of pretty much every movie.
That just goes to show you how little I watch these movies. But yeah, you were mentioning before we started, like, to what degree would I call myself a Transformers fan? I wouldn't really. I'm my experience with the franchise beyond Transformers Prime has always been very, very passive.
And
It
that's
is
kind of how it is for me. I watch the cartoons a lot, but I couldn't tell you really the mythology or what was going on. I just kind of liked what I was seeing and like pretty colors and action and robots fighting each other. This is cool. And that was Transformers not Beast Wars. It was Transformers Cybertron, I think. Was that show on Toonami or somewhere around that time where I was watching that
the
kind
one
of passively and occasionally as a kid?
you talking about the anime that had like the mini cons in it?
I think.
If I recall correctly, that was Transformers Armada. And yeah, I watched that one a lot when I was around that age.
I think there's another one actually called Transformers Cybertron, and they were CGI in that show.
Okay, then that must have been like oh man, I because there's so many series at this point, and I know for a fact that one of them was like an offshoot of Beast Wars, but it went back to regular Cybertronians. I don't know. I have a lot of sort of like very mixed knowledge about this franchise that's just all over the place.
Okay, so talking about this movie in particular, um, did you see this in theaters? Like, where was this in your purview as a kid when it came out?
Okay, so I did see this in theaters, and weirdly enough, I also have memory of it being shown to my school year about whenever it is it became available for home video. My school staff decided for some reason this movie would be good to show us in like the school auditorium as like a school movie night.
This is kind of a fun movie. I
Yeah,
went back to it a lot as a kid, and I think I watched this last time I watched was about a year ago. Like I almost never go like a full year and a half without popping this in.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm immediately the little bits of dialogue that I'm catching right now is already like, yep, this is a Michael Bay movie, and of course we've got helicopters against sunset. It's immediately that Michael Bay iconography.
Yeah, low angle shots, very heroic military. This man loves the military.
I'm actually kind of. I feel I'm not sure what it is, and on the likelihood that we're going to be looking at the rest of these movies. Josh Duhamel's character, whose name I'm forgetting, and that is going to be the case with a lot of characters across these movies. But I think it's interesting that we're opening up with him and that he's
He's Major Lennox.
Lennox, yeah, and the other guy is Epps. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that we're opening with him and that for at least the first three movies, he's going to be kind of a secondary protagonist, sort of, but we kind of lose track of that as the movies go on. I don't know. I feel like
Well,
maybe
he never really gets an arc.
yeah, I feel like Michael Bay wants him and sort of his posse to be a major part just because of his affinity for the military. But I don't know. There's something like you're right. He doesn't have an arc, so it's a little bit weird, like the amount of presence his character does or doesn't have across these movies.
Um, I think he's just kind of a fun secondary character.
Yeah, at least functionally, that's what he is. Yeah.
So I also saw this in theaters, and my mother got me the two disc edition set for this film. And at the time, like as a kid, I'd seen a lot of that, but I wasn't sure exactly what that was. And so one day, like on occasion, I just decided to pop in that second disc and see what it was. And it was all the behind the scenes features for this film. And this movie is kind of where I get my love and affinity for film.
Hmm.
Weirdly
That's
enough,
interesting.
like I saw like hours and hours of like how this movie was made, how they did the stunts, how they like went about designing the robots and picking like what cars they would be and everything, and how pretty much everything you see in this movie, like action wise, is real with the obvious exception of the robots, but almost everything, well, pretty much everything else, Michael Bay gets in camera. All the explosions, all the flipping cars, he's actually doing all that.
Ah. Or just so basically say that this movie is for you, like what the Lord of the Rings trilogy is for Lindsay Ellis.
I guess so.
And sort of interestingly, this I don't have that with this movie, but I do have something kind of interesting, which is maybe this happened before and I'm just not remembering great, and maybe this just has to do with like the age that me and my friends were at the time. This is the first movie that I saw in theaters where I can remember like talking about it afterwards with my friends, like days and weeks afterwards after we had all seen it. We didn't really do that with movies before this one, where like we would meet up in school and we would be like talking about lines and action scenes with each other. That's that I feel like the first time I really had that experience was with this movie.
And I remember, well, as the years have gone on, like going back to this movie, the effects here are freaking phenomenal. Like the robots for all three films, they always look like they're there every single time. Like this movie really, well, this franchise really, particularly like the first two films, really pushed CGI in Hollywood, particularly for ILM, because they nearly, I believe, in the behind the scenes for the second one, they talk about how they nearly crashed a lot of their computers rendering effects for Transformers 2.
Oi. And we'll talk about Transformers 2 probably when we get to it. But these movies, if nothing else, at least the first three, which are the ones that I saw in theaters, are very much crowd pleasing movies, and I feel like that's mainly true of this one. And to a degree, we can talk about the second one, but this was also a case of, again, when I saw this in the theater, it was with a lot of people my age, So a lot of really young kids. I would have been 10 or 11 at the time. So it was very the first time I think I can recall people in a theater being really excited as action happens and like
Yeah,
really laughing with the jokes and stuff like that. And nowadays that experience is more and more common for me, I think, as again we I don't know the degree to which a lot of how movies are now can be traced back to this. I think this is you're right in that this is the first big blockbuster in a while that's like this, as far as it is very big, effects driven, like huge action set pieces, and yet also kind of like a screwball comedy at times.
yeah.
And like that's a formula that will kind of perfect, I guess, in the Marvel movies. But this is the first like big instance of that happening, that kind of balance, I think. And speaking of which, here we go with the screwball comedy segment.
Oh yeah, pretty much everything with Shia LaBeouf in this movie. Um,
Everyone in
I
this,
think the only film I saw him in prior to this was Hole or Holes.
yeah, Holes, and he was in Even Stevens, of course. So
Now
he's like,
he's our big main character. How do you feel about him?
um, okay, so again, I've seen like a lot of sort of analyses of these movies and sort of the way that his character functions in them, and some of this might I don't know. I've again, this is the movie that I've seen. It's been the longest since I've seen this movie. I've seen all of the sequels, at least in a time span like earlier than I rewatched this. So I'm not sure to what degree like my distaste for Sam as a character is mainly relegated to movies 2 and 3. But going off of those movies, I really dislike him. He's really obnoxious. He's kind of a very easy to dislike character. But I'm gonna see if I have that with him here, where like immediately with this scene, you can tell that he's kind of directionless or at least like lacking drive. Like he didn't bother to really put an effort into this project that he's supposed to be presenting. He is kind of supposed to be, I guess the term you would use is like relatably pathetic.
Yeah, I feel like, and I got this sense even as a kid that he's supposed to be kind of our Peter Parker, but he doesn't really have the responsibility lesson or any kind of like super traumatic experience, and he's not even really all that smart.
Yeah.
He's just kind of a. I'm
Well,
having a hard time describing like finding the terminology, but he's kind of just a guy.
yeah, he's like we talked over it, trying to like as his class leaves, he's trying to like pawn off his grandfather's or his great grandfather's glasses for like 40 or $50. And like, yeah, I think he's supposed to be pathetic, but in like a relatable kind of way where it's like he's just an average Joe Schmo, but not like in the way that's endearing, in a way that's like, ah, look at this poor guy. Isn't he just such a lost cause? Isn't he such a terrible case?
Yeah,
And yet he never really grows out of that. You're right. Like the way that Peter Parker is in the origin, particularly, I like to think comics Peter Parker, where he can be a little bit vindictive and really self-involved, and like him growing out of that is a slow process, but it happens. I don't think Sam really gets that kind of growth. He's kind of stuck in like origin territory as far as his character goes.
especially when we get to that third movie, and I think that third film is one of the main reasons people kind of have a genuine distaste for this character.
Yeah, he's really bad in that one.
So
uh
how do you feel about well, I don't know how much you watched the original series, but I think um oh this guy,
Bernie Mac, rest in.
Bernie Mac,
But how do I feel about what as far as
the Camaro, like us kind of changing up some cars here and there for a more modern kind of flavor.
that? I don't. at all. I actually think that's a really smart choice, just as far as the whole point of them being cars in the first place is that
So
I
they can hide in today's world.
but I mean, like, from a meta perspective, is that kids like robots and kids, you assume, although I don't know how much this is true nowadays or even in 2007, also like cars. So you would want the cars to be like cool cars that people see or like kids would see on the street and be like, oh, hey, that's cool, as opposed to like, your dad's favorite car.
And a lot of people, well, a lot of diehard like OG Transformers fans that were like their main like their definitive version is Generation One. They talked about this movie as if Bumblebee was a Volkswagen Bug instead. The movie is somehow better, and I've never understood that.
I'm glad I didn't encounter any of that myself.
Especially because like we've now gotten Bumblebee, and I'll be honest, I don't feel like it's as good as this movie.
Uh, mm, oh boy. I don't know. I'm trying really hard not to get hung up on like little lines of like off-color racial humor, and just my first response being, "Yep, that's Michael Bay for you." Like the little Ricky Ricardo line he just gave, and that actually, I feel like again, like the age that I was when this came out, I don't really know for sure what to like judge this against. The sense of humor in this movie kind of reminds me of like an 80s movie where like those movies for kids more so than the ones we get now were a little bit more adult as far as just like characters being a little mean-spirited, the dialogue and the humor being a little bit off color and risque to the degree of like if I were a parent, I would maybe be wondering, do I want my kid to see this? And then I just pull back. But yeah, I get kind of that vibe from. Oh gosh, I forgot this happened. I, wow, I totally forgot that this just how desperate Bumblebee was to be the car that gets chosen.
He like puts out a sonic blast that breaks all the windows.
Yep. And so, like, obviously, they know at this point who Sam is and like his connection to his great grandfather and those glasses, right?
Um, well, yeah, the all the Autobots know already.
Okay. It's John Voight. I look at this guy with the glasses, and all I can see is Kyle Calgren.
And Trish from Jessica Jones is in this movie,
Oh, right, that's who that is. Wow.
and
I
she gets
used
to
to
keep her natural Australian accent.
I used to just know her as this role and nothing else. And now that I'm looking at her, wow, wow. Everyone in this movie is so orange.
Yeah, Michael Bay loves putting tan women in his movies.
Not even just though, like the killer, yes, but everyone really.
This this whole like general subplot I think is uh I guess necessary for like putting it intrinsically in our world that you have the military and the government so connected to this and looking into this because they would if we actually got aliens that were able to do all this stuff.
I also I also think sort of the way that the movie is, I think, building on stuff like Independence Day and to a lesser degree like Michael Bay's own stuff like Armageddon, where it's like, okay, the Transformers are the big world changing event. Let's make this like a huge cast of characters in their own kind of circles, trying to solve the problem and then coming together near the end. And again, like we just did the Stranger Things video, Stranger Things kind of takes that same approach where it's like, okay, we've got a big kind of conspiracy thing. Let's let's not just make this like we have a protagonist. Let's not just make this a singular protagonist thing and that's it. Like we've got all these camps in like different directions that are like trying to tackle the problem in different ways. And also his username on eBay is ladies man something.
Yeah, 217.
Yeah, which is another one of those things where it's like, oh Sam, you poor schmuck.
And his parents are like lovably obnoxious.
Yeah, we're gonna get
At least in this film, I know that people don't like his parents in the second film, particularly the mom when she gets high. But I think they're as dearing as they need to be in this movie.
okay, so like here's the thing with the second one, and I was gonna save this until we talked about it, but like I was shocked upon like basically immediately coming out of that movie realizing the degree to which it was like universally reviled, because seeing it in theaters, the crowd that was in the theater I saw it with were loving it,
Yeah,
especially that stuff with the mom. Like in both times seeing these two first movies in theaters, the parent stuff gets the biggest laughs, and that's also true of when I saw it with my classmates. Uh, a scene that we are going to get to that heavily involves the two of them got like by far the most laughs when I saw it with my class.
and I think what's interesting is like the general audience is not nearly as critical. Like they find those moments funny just because they feel real.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they're not as critical as like critics or people who are paid to just critique a movie would be.
Yeah, and I think even it might even go beyond sort of like not having as critical a perspective or as discerning an eye. I think, on at least some degree, there is a level of, for critics, a degree of shame in finding like lowbrow stuff funny just because the position of critic is meant to come with a degree of like prestige. And I'm glad that that's
This
sort
this
of
is a really thrilling action scene. Sorry to cut you off, Nick, but
oh yeah, you're
I
not
really
wrong.
like
You're
I
not.
like that scene. I think that scene is really important in showing just how dangerous the Transformers are versus just the most well-equipped people we have to fight them.
Yeah, but we'll get to that because we've cut away here to Sam's friend, who will join the majority of this cast as characters who will not show up in the sequels or be mentioned or
I,
whatever.
I feel like Michaela's boyfriend here is always an obnoxious asshole and everything. He has a familiar face.
I don't
Um,
know what I've seen him in.
oh yeah, I've seen him in the remake of Friday the 13th. He's also an obnoxious douchebag there who cheats on his girlfriend. I haven't seen him in anything since, but I feel like he's that guy that just gets typecast as douchebag jock in
What
everything.
what is this doing? Why are you in a tree? Oof.
The cutback to the football thing I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah,
That almost feels like a Family Guy joke.
kinda, yeah. Except it doesn't go on for a million years.
No,
Shots fired. Sam is me right now. Get out of the tree. What are you doing?
you're ruining everything.
But yeah, like I was saying, I appreciate that like as time goes on and as like the internet makes it easier for just whoever to criticize movies professionally or semi-professionally, that we're sort of getting rid of this stigma for critics that like what they like has to be at least to some degree highbrow, because I feel like that's kind of putting a limitation on critics. And I feel like around this time a lot of media critics felt like they had to be highbrow and like they're not allowed to laugh at or enjoy things that regular audiences don't have that kind of filter for, where it's like what's funny is obviously subjective and depends on the person. But I think there is a certain degree, or there was at least a certain degree, maybe there still is, of like, okay, how much do I have to dislike gross comedy not even because it's not my thing, but just because it is gross comedy and I'm a critic.
Yeah, I feel like that with I don't know. I feel like that with a lot of critics. Not necessarily ones that I follow, but when you're looking at general consensus and when you look at what critics actually say on Rotten Tomatoes, a lot of them do feel very highbrow. This is beneath me.
Yeah. And I don't even think that's necessarily like an ego thing. I just think that's sort of once you're in that position, you feel like you're put in a box almost.
I remember the producers talking quite a bit about how they wanted this to be a very relatable story, like kid gets car, kid gets the girl kind of thing.
Yeah. And I feel like that worked. In this movie, I feel like that element works for the most part, even if, again, Sam is really, really pathetic.
I just put in that light there. The
Yeah.
light reflects off the disco ball.
Yeah. And like I'll say this, for that being the intent, Shia LaBeouf was really great casting because he's great at playing like kind of awkward intensity.
Yeah, like not comfortable in his own skin, is not sure exactly what he should be saying.
Yeah. And like that was like part of his appeal on Even Stevens and part of his like appeal in Suburbia, that sort of like faux rear window thing that he was in around this time.
We're about to get to that
Oh
big,
god.
kind of iconic scene.
Yep. Megan Fox in this outfit pretty
Yeah,
much sold half of this movie's
yeah,
ticket.
leaning over the hood of the car.
Yeah. Oh my god, stop talking.
This is hilarious. I do think it is cool to make her a mechanic, and like
Yeah,
we give her some cool stuff to do with Bumblebee in the third act. I like that a lot.
yeah, it's us someone yeah, it was Lindsay Ellis again who made a really good point about like restructure these movies a little bit and you could get rid of Sam and make her the protagonist and it would probably be a better story because just like she's the one who has like a compelling backstory with like her father and what happened with that. She's the one who has like a tangible personal obstacle to overcome is like people underestimating her and not taking her seriously because she's a girl.
Yeah,
And she's the one who has like a connection with cars. So why is she not the lead in this Transformers movie?
and I don't know. I don't know how I think it's kind of interesting that like Sam clearly is trying. Like he tried in that moment, like to not objectify her and look at her as an object, but the
And
movie clearly is.
yeah, it's like the movie is, and in that moment especially, is trying to like basically be in his POV, and so he's trying, but he's failing, and I think the movie is like playing his failure to succeed at that as like a joke. It's a little weird. Like I can't help but feel bad for this character now, and part of that might also just be the degree to which I feel bad for Megan Fox as an actress. She got really pigeonholed, I feel, because of this role, and like
Yeah,
her relationship with Michael Bay wasn't very smooth.
no,
And so, yeah, I don't know. This is just kind of, I feel really bad on multiple levels.
and I don't. I mean, I'm not gonna call her the best actress in the world or anything, but despite the fact that Michael Bay like chose to use her, and again, I really want to commend him for what he did with her in Bumblebee in the third act,
Mm-hmm.
because I love that scene.
Yeah,
But I do think for the most part, we kind of relegate her to male eye candy.
yeah, and it's one of those fine lines where it's like, at least for this movie, before we get into all of the sequels, which I think are just firmly into like really kind of gross sexualizing. For this movie, I think the intent, at least, is sort of admirable as far as the other characters are just treating her like eye candy, and so the movie is sort of like transforming its like presentation of her as the characters stop doing that to her. Whether or not it works, whether or not Michael Bay was necessarily the right guy to attempt that, I appreciate the intent, or at least what I think is the intent. But like I said, with the sequels, we'll just fully get into no, she and basically every other woman in these movies exists for male eye candy, and we're not even like trying to do anything with it.
No.
And this
Frenzy is awesome.
yeah, this is the thing that like is able to kind of like flatten itself, right?
No. I think you're thinking of the second film.
Oh yeah, you're right. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how many times we do this because I don't remember this being like a big thing in most other like Transformers media. Like it'll happen a couple of times, but for the most part, we're focused on like the big robots and stuff.
Yeah, we usually don't do like small robots that can like, weave in and out of like human installations.
Yeah, and really likes doing that. Like I want to say at least once in each of the first three movies, there's going to be like an extended sequence of like a smaller robot sort of infiltrating a place.
And this scene is really cool. This shot here is practical.
Mm-hmm. Why would he? Why? Of course, it's gonna be. He dropped it on the ground.
Oh man. And we
I
kind
will.
of make this a really tense, really engaging scene.
I will say for as like for as kind of obnoxious as it can get under not just this franchise but Michael Bay's movies, like his filmography as a whole. I do feel like there is kind of an element of humanity in little things like that are in his movies and not really anything else that I can think of as far as like yeah, we'll just have characters do little dumb things that are kind of undignified. Like they'll pick something off the ground and then eat it and then kind of grimace because it's gross. And it's like, well, duh. At the same time, like that's funny because on some level I can see someone doing that. And it's like
Yeah.
kind of thing that we never do in movies.
Yeah, we usually don't. And like that's the thing. It's like he peppers in little moments of like humanity in his films. Stuff that actually feels like real. Like you take a step back from the like Hollywoodness of the movie and just that's when the movie stops feeling like a movie and you're more immersed and it just feels real.
Yeah. And as far as the humor specifically goes, I do think much of like what we were just or like the point I made with Spider-Man Far From Home, I think it's little humorous moments like that work a little bit more, or like the whole get out of the tree thing, as opposed to again what will become like a common thing in the sequels, which is we'll take stuff like that and we'll extend it out so it's a bit, so it's like a little comedic sketch within the movie as opposed to what feels like a human moment, and that's when it gets obnoxious, I think.
Yeah. It's a fine line. You got to be real careful with that. Like otherwise, you start undercutting your own movie, which for the most part, you still want people to take seriously, even though you want them to have fun with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a really cool little intense scene. Seeing them take out these agents.
Mm. Also, this whole just comparing this one to the sequels, but maybe it's the degree to which, as you said, we also have to sort of like create a little walking dust. But maybe it's maybe it's to a certain degree the level to which they also have to create these figures in like practical effects, but the character designs of the Cybertronians in this first movie, I feel like, generally have a little bit more thought put into them than the sequels will, where like they feel a bit more of a piece. And again, like because we have to create these uh these practical versions of them, they obviously feel like something that real people could make. And it's not quite like the OG Transformers aesthetic, but it's kind of like this movie's own take on it.
Yeah, which you cannot really do if you're going for 100% photorealism, which they were.
Yeah. Also, we have our first no, 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 no.
I think Honest Trailers makes a joke out of that.
Everyone, especially after the second movie came out, everyone was making jokes out of like Shia LaBeouf just going no, 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 no is his catchphrase in like every movie. Jesus Christ, Sam, stop.
Send in all units, bring everyone.
Seriously, like it's funny, but like at a certain point, I'm just like, wow, this character is just such a dweeb.
Yeah, that's kind of what I like about him in this first movie.
Oh, here we go.
And shockingly, I mean, I don't know if I'll have this viewing, but I've kind of had it with most of my viewings of this movie. I shockingly, and I'm not going to say, like, oddly enough, Mikaela is kind of actually a character in this film, even though we objectify her a lot.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't say she's as shallow as I'm only going to date the jock. They actually kind of make me buy that those two get together at the end of this movie.
Yeah, I have in this movie what I have with Kirsten Dunst's Mary Jane in the first Raimi movie, where on the page, like on the script level at least, I feel like there is a layer to the characters that audiences maybe didn't get to acknowledge because the characters around them didn't acknowledge it, where they're both kind of putting on a face and they're with the jock just because you assume just because of like the they feel like that's what's necessary or like there's a degree of maybe social stability to that, and the other characters around them don't realize what the heck is going on with them, and so the movie doesn't like make it explicit as it could, and then
Yeah.
the sequels kind of neglect, not necessarily neglect that part of the character, but don't characterize them as well and make them way more shallow and less likable.
Fun little tidbit about this scene we just talked over. Um, the one of the dogs actually got off the chain, and Shia LaBeouf actually had to like legit outrun that dog before
That's
the dog houndlers could get to it.
that's
And Michael Bay talks about it, he's like, thank God Shia's a fast runner because that thing wasn't stopping. It was going to clamp down on that poor kid's ankle.
I'm shocked that he was holding the door open just to let her go in.
Yeah, this is kind of serious and the top secret as it gets. And they're like, who are you? It's really interesting seeing scenes like this now that I'm in the military.
Like sense.
I don't know, like I mean I'm not working at the Pentagon obviously, but like to see like my higher ups in this kind of setting in a science fiction film,
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this a little more when we get to the sequel. But almost any time there's like a major thing that happens with the Navy in these movies, and we would like watch them, like me and my shipmates, like when we're on the ship and we're just chilling watching movies, and it'll happen. We'll all just kind of like turn to each other and laugh. Particularly, well, this is kind of the opposite of that, but there's a scene in Transformers 2 where a whole bunch of Navy aircraft carriers get blown up, and my shipmates just kind of stare at me in unison, and they're like, "Really?" And I'm like, "What? What looking at me for? Like, I just picked the movie. I knew the scene was coming. It's not like I secretly want us to blow up, guys."
For some reason, one of those lines always sticks with me. That he just was like, "Is that what the kids are doing these days? A little bit of mojo."
You eyeballing my piece 50 cent? Like, what? I feel like this guy is high.
No, he's just in a Michael Bay production. Okay, here we are. Here we go with that.
Our big action, or our first, well, kind of our second big action set piece.
The first one was a little short though,
Yeah, it's a little short.
kind of like prologue-y type stuff.
Hmm.
This is the first like really big extended like showcase of one of these things.
And what's interesting about Tyler? What'd you say, Nick?
No, no, it's just there he is.
That's mortifying.
Yeah. The thank you for self-censoring.
that that bit is unintentionally funny when he skewers that guy and he flings him around.
Yeah, that being the case.
And it's just all the effects here are so beautifully integrated. And they had like explosive wire laid in tracks to create that effect of it like burrowing underground.
Oh, that's run, run! It's the Hulk. Run! The Hulk is trademark. Marvel Comics. Run! It's a con.
uh, interesting thing to note about Tyrese Gibson. He uh, he paid Michael Bay to be in this movie.
Oh, huh. I didn't know that.
He wanted to be in this franchise.
Well, I mean, especially like before this one even comes out, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Like, is it?
and Fast and Furious is not like, I mean, it's fairly big. I think it might have been like the only other huge like name franchise that wasn't a superhero thing before we got these films. But I don't think we got in the fifth film yet, and so the Fast and Furious franchise was not necessarily in an upswing because
Had
a
we
lot of people.
fourth one?
What's up?
Had we even gotten the fourth one?
I don't know.
Ay, ay, ay. Because this is '07.
What is that?
That's my phone, unfortunately.
Did you get that handled or
Yep, I got it.
what were you saying?
This is '07. I'm sure the fourth Fast and Furious hadn't even come out yet.
Okay, yeah. So that franchise is not exactly in an upswing, and he he's really well. He's kind of kind of an ongoing gag in these movies. He's just that kind of he's kind of obnoxious in the same way he is in the Fast and Furious movies.
Hmm. I didn't. Okay,
Only
he's
he's not played as much as an idiot. Like he's kind of just an idiot who is there in Fast and Furious, and you kind of wonder why he's even on Dom's team.
I he's such a small part in these movies. I can't even speak to that.
Um, but one thing I kind of love about him being in this franchise is me and my brother. I know you don't particularly like Cinema Sins, but me and my brother did, at least when we were kids. And so almost every time we'd see a movie with him, and whenever we would go back to these, we would say, "Earn that paycheck, Tyrese." Whenever he comes back on screen,
Just check. What does your timestamp say right now?
it says 43, 43:22. Why?
Okay, no, just making sure that I'm still in the same place.
Oh, did you pause it?
I had to for like 2 seconds. Yeah, but I'm good. It's good.
I'm not sure what else there is to say about this action, but it's solid.
Yeah, it's just, hmm, I guess you could say it's interesting that we do kind of like a progression thing where, again, sort of like prologue wise, we open with there's a big Cybertronian walking around, but as far as like actual set pieces of the movie go, the first one we really got was with the little one. And so it's a little guy sort of like doing a more covert thing. Now we're up to something that's obviously bigger, but it's still not quite the giant, like upright behemoths that are going to be walking around and pounding each other in the next action sequence. So we're kind of like slowly building to quote unquote real Transformers action.
Do you think, um, like some hardcore Transformers fans, do you think it was a mistake to even do live action in the first place, and we should have just done um, animated Transformers films so that we could focus exclusively on the Transformers?
No. Is it necessarily the choice that I would have made? Not necessarily. I'm not sure what I would have done as someone who's not really a Transformers fan. If I was like, hey, make another Transformers movie for the big screen, what do you do with it? I'm not sure what I would do, but I don't think there's anything wrong with this approach of like, yeah, see if we can do it. See if we can make a live CG blend and sort of because again, prior to this point, Transformers is kind of a niche thing. It's really well liked by kids of a certain generation, but that audience isn't necessarily who we're making this movie for, and we want to make a lot of money. So, like, this approach always makes sense to me. Is like the first entry in like what's meant to be a big franchise for quadrant audiences, which is like slowly introduce the big genre thing or the big like selling point element in a world that feels like ours, and so you do that by spending a lot of time with human characters. And for something like say another kid's property that was big in the 80s and would try that approach with like I don't know the Smurfs or something, there I think that's dumb because like on no level is that even like trying to like Smurfs by nature is a very niche thing, and that's just baked into the premise. For something like this, like okay, giant robots come to Earth and they fight each other. Obviously, we can like make that so that it appeals to as many people as possible. And if the way that we have to do that is for one movie, we spend like the first half slowly bringing them in and spending a lot of time with humans so that we can like acclimate general audiences just to the idea, then fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I don't either. Um, and Transformers Prime is more about the Transformers, but you still have the kids playing a fairly prominent role.
Yeah, especially because I want to say that like these movies were kind of not necessarily at their peak of popularity, but at their peak of like cultural presence when that show started. I think a lot of people, myself included, were expecting it to be more focused on the humans than it was, and so it was kind of a pleasant surprise when it was like, no, the Transformers are the main characters.
That wasn't really a surprise for me when you're doing it animated.
Oh dear.
That is one of like the most outrageous big racial jokes in the whole movie.
Yep. And then we'll get later to you eat the whole plate. Although now it's maybe got a layer of like harsher in hindsight to it, where it's like you just know someone in that house got a bullet in them. But yeah, I think to that point though, it becomes more of a valid criticism again when we get to the sequels, and it's like, okay, we've set up the premise for main audiences. Tons and tons of people showed up for this movie. I don't think there's really an excuse to, in movies two and three, still be doing like focus majorly on the humans and don't even really bring in the robots until like act two, and then still the humans are the main characters. At some point, this franchise should have become about the Transformers with the humans as like a side thing, if they're there at all, and we never really got there.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Okay, to where would you say that that happened?
Well, when you said that at some point, like in this franchise, the Transformers should have been outright the main characters, especially because, well, I mean, I think Avatar is the closest we've gotten to having an insane, like crazy, complicated, like fully rendered creature for almost the entirety of the film.
Hmm.
Like to have the effects at this level as good as they are for a 90-minute runtime, like constantly, almost every single shot you need to be rendering an Autobot. I don't know if that's a legitimate complaint you can throw at this franchise.
Uh, hmm. You might be. I'm not entirely sure though. I don't know because again, you also have to consider for Avatar there was the matter of not just fully rendering the characters, but most of the environments. And I don't think they would have that. Like, you can still set them on Earth, you can still shoot in a real place.
That's true.
And also, there's the matter of they probably wouldn't do this for a bunch of scenes because then people would complain. But you can have scenes of like just the Transformers in their vehicle forms communicating, and then really all you need is like shots of people driving or flying, and then you put dialogue over it, and you could get like a couple of good scenes out of that. I feel like it's feasible.
Um, yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know about that, but
Maybe not at the time, but now I feel like you could do it.
and what's weird about Marvel, like I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, and this is kind of a tangent, but we get to Avengers, right?
Uh-huh.
Hulk looks completely photoreal. He looks amazing.
Mhm.
And then we get to Ragnarok, and I feel like he looks like a cartoon for that entire movie.
You're right. And then I feel like we mostly get him back to photoreal for
Endgame.
Endgame. And the thing is, part of this might just be they're adopting the three movies a year approach now, and that means that some movies have to suffer in the CG department just because of the way that they've got the release schedules. And I don't know to what degree that's true, but I think it's the only way that you explain something like Black Panther, where for the most part, the CG in that movie, I think, is pretty up to par, if not better. And then near the end, it starts to fall apart a little bit in that department. I think the only explanation for that is um, like at
Maybe time and budgetary constraints.
not even budget. I think it must be all time. Like at some point,
They
some
have to eventually turn it in the can.
yeah, and I don't know to what degree that's true of Ragnarok, but I think that starts to happen around the time that they decide to do the three movies a year, which was 2017.
This whole little chase bit I think is pretty fun. I really buy like their performances, how freaked out they are and the dialogue they have.
Yeah, and again, it's escalation where we're gonna have where again this is the first real action scene with two. You've got one Autobot and one Decepticon, and we're gonna have a chase scene with the cars before we get into like the real like right now the transforming, and now they're gonna have like a real
The
like
Rock'em Sock'em robot fight.
yeah.
Oh, we haven't mentioned this yet, and this would be an appropriate place to get into this. I have, even as a kid, even since first viewing, I have never had a problem making out any of the action in these first three films, or who's a Decepticon and who's an Autobot. I've never had that, and I think that complaint is completely unfounded, and I don't know what people are talking about.
I that with I think one scene, maybe two scenes in the second one. The third one I've only seen, I believe, two or three times, and that was a while ago, so I can't speak to that. I definitely don't have that problem here. I think, again, I may revise this when we go to the sequels, but I think particularly with those movies, people are maybe not necessarily saying exactly what they mean, where people say they can't tell who's who as far as like just who's on whose side and like what's going on. I think what people mean when they say that is just like what action is actually taking place as far as like you've got colors and general kind of like body shape to help you with like okay who actually is which character. But I do think in the sequels there is a degree of okay we've got really intricate designs for these characters, and the way that shots are arranged and the way that the fights kind of take place with them like really close to each other, really all up in each other's grill. It's difficult some I can see it being difficult sometimes to tell like okay, is someone getting punched or kicked right now, or
I've never had that.
what was that move that they just did? I don't know. I could see someone having that. And like you also mentioned that you didn't have that with any of the Godzilla movies. So I don't know. Your eyesight must just be really above average.
Well, I've only seen three, counting the new one that just came out. I've only seen the 2014 film Kings and Monsters, and the one that came out in the early 2000s, and I only saw that one once.
Early 2000s.
Wasn't there one? Or maybe it was the early to late 90s.
If you're talking about the Roland Emmerich one, that was
Yeah,
yeah 98.
yeah. I saw the one that came out in '98,
Hmm.
but one time, and I didn't love that movie as a kid, so I never went back to it.
Hmm. I don't.
But yeah, I think all the action in these films is fine. I've never felt like it's too close. I've never had an issue seeing who's who, what's going on, who's shooting at what. Like I've always been able to tell.
Yeah, I'm gonna refrain from coming down on that one way or the other until we get to some of the more chaotic action scenes. But
How do you feel about? Well,
yeah, I was gonna ask if you're gonna ask me the same thing. Let me see, because I was gonna ask you how you felt about the whole Bumblebee speaking through the radio thing as a choice.
well, not being super familiar with G1, like I didn't see the G1 like original series almost at all prior to seeing these movies. Um, so I didn't have any particular attachment to any one Autobot going into this movie other than Optimus,
Hmm.
and I didn't really feel one way or the other about it. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing to tie it to something that a car specifically does.
Yeah, that's actually the point. Just I could see people who were like really into it because again, I don't know the degree to which that may or may not have happened with previous Bumblebees. I know that we do we don't do the radio thing with Prime Bumblebee. We do the mute thing, but yeah, there's I can see that being a thing where like OG fans would maybe question that, and this is incredibly awkward.
Yeah.
But what are you gonna do? I guess.
But again, a lot of these, almost all these interactions feel real, and that's what makes them work.
Okay. Oh, wait, sorry. What did you say? I was distracted by the insult to Camaros.
Almost all their interactions feel real, and that's why it works.
Yeah, at least in this movie.
Yeah, pure insanity. I've kind of always wanted a Camaro, and that mostly comes from this movie. But
Yeah.
I've always wanted a Camaro, like just fully black. I've always just wanted a black Camaro, not like actual Bumblebee colors, but just fully black.
Hmm. Do you think this music is diegetic? Like Bumblebee's just trying to show off?
Oh, that, and she just insulted him. Just she's like, you know what? Screw you. I'm gonna level up.
Yeah, but like, I think he came in like blasting that music, or is it just like part of the soundtrack?
Um, it's hard to tell, honestly.
I
I
like,
think you can read that either way, and
yeah.
it works. I love that we haven't talked about this. This movie's also kind of where I get my love and appreciation for score. I think the score here is beautiful.
This theme is so rad, so cool.
I've listened to this. Yeah, I listened to this score like countless amount of times as a kid,
And like I
but
remember,
especially in art class whenever I was like drawing a superhero or something. Like it feels so like not whimsical, but like majestic and almost like a heroic way, if that makes any sense.
yeah, it's got gravitas.
Yeah,
And like I recall, someone who used to do videos doesn't really do them anymore. Welshie talking about this first movie and why he likes it, and like this scene being his favorite, and this being the moment where like him as a Transformers fan,
we get a reference to Armageddon. That guy's talking about Armageddon there.
yep, and like yeah, this whole thing is like really well shot and really, there's I'll say this on the note of like, should the Transformers be like the main characters or not in like future movies? There's a degree of like respect and pathos that they're treated with in scenes like this,
Yeah,
where they're like these weird, mysterious beings, and like they're treated as like a big deal. And the future movies will kind of start to lose that a bit, where they're treated really, really casually, and they're just kind of there.
yeah, especially when we just go overboard and throw so many Transformers in the second movie.
Yeah. Oh, this bit of love with them coming out of the pool.
Yeah, I think this was a stinger at the end of one of the trailers.
Mm.
That little girl's adorable. Yeah, it's interesting. They all kind of look the same until they take a vehicle shape.
Yeah, almost kind of a default to them.
Yeah, they have this like default setting. Um, I, I love the vehicle they went with for Optimus. I do like the flames. I think that's kind of an inspired choice.
Yeah.
And the amount of detail and like finding a place, like real parts of every car, like corresponding with the robot form, I think was just insane. Like it's insane, like how detailed that they were able to make these robots, and like how this looks. This one take here coming up, it's
Yep.
freaking incredible. It still holds up over a decade later. This is actually happening. Like in the theater, like on every single viewing, this is actually happening. We're actually seeing vehicles transform into sentient robots.
Yeah. And like they could have gone the other way, like the cartoons did, where it's just a very quick, very simple, straightforward change. And I don't think anyone would have complained. But the choice to do this the way that they did it, and like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. I have no control over that. But the choice to do it like this is is it's like you look at that scene and that's a scene that everyone points to as like this was a monumental leap for effects like this, and like things
As you said that, Jazz did a leap.
and like things would kind of never be the same after this. I don't think. Like without this, of course, you don't get Iron Man. It's like the way that we kind of do robots and mechanical effects in general with CG is entirely informed by this movie.
Absolutely. Like ILM, the big industry that kind of does every like big effects extravaganza kind of film. They were put through their paces with this franchise, and it really benefited pretty much every other big science fiction film that would come after it.
Bumblebee matched.
Um, I'm gonna look into it. I don't know if the voice thing was just something they came up with for this franchise, or if it was done anywhere in the previous iterations.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It doesn't feel like something that they just made up. It feels like that's a source material thing that they just adapted. I don't know why I exactly feel that way, but
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it would come up with from whole cloth. But I can't. Like again, I don't like keep track of the Transformers franchise, but I've like passingly like watched and read and seen things of previous incarnations prior to this movie, and this is the first one where I feel like that's like a big deal. Then again, this is the first incarnation I think where Bumblebee as a character is a big deal. I'm not sure.
because we made him the robot that Sam like builds a real connection with.
Yeah, it might just be a thing where it is part of the character in previous versions, but it wasn't like a big enough detail to come up or anything as far as like discussion of that went.
So we have a fairly standard kind of Avengers esque MacGuffin plot here.
Right, with the Allspark.
Mhm. That's our Tesseract.
Mm. It's always a cube. It's always got to be a box.
And they actually did build which is kind of impressive.
This is so cool.
Yeah. And it's not like this is kind of the only scene we get with this set. It's kind of impressive and crazy that they just went out of their way to build it.
Yeah. I don't want to, because we're only halfway through, and I'm also not sure to what degree it's just us talking over it. But for the most part, this is holding up as far as like just being a really sort of like well paced, well done, well executed, fun action movie.
Yeah. I think people like when they think of the franchise in general, they kind of ignore this and they think of the latter ones, much like with the Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man films. Like we kind of forget that the first two happened, and we just like despise Toby and that franchise overall just for emo Peter Parker and the walking and doing the strut thing.
Well,
That's kind of all people talk about when they talk about Toby Spider-Man, as if the first two movies didn't happen.
I feel like a I feel like that's way more true for these movies than the Spider-Man movies. I feel like for the Spider-Man movies, that's very much in like online circles, and not like certain. There's a certain camp that's decided that they hate the Raimi movies, and I think that's kind of a vocal minority. And I know there's plenty of stuff to complain about, like if you wanted to in one and two, but for the most part, I think like culturally, like more widespread.
Those are two very beloved films, still.
Yeah. Whereas in that same sort of sphere of discourse with the Transformers movies, I feel like what happened was this one was a really well done.
This is so funny to me. I don't know why. I hate the whole plane.
It's hilarious. Hey, you got to say that at parties. But like yeah, I feel like on that same level of like outside of just fan circles, of just like general like critics, general audiences, the widespread kind of movie discussion sphere. With the Transformers movies, this one was a really fun, kind of shallow, but really well executed and like a good example of filmmaking
This
for
guy's so funny.
years for a fun action movie. And then with the second one, it was kind of like a steep, immediate drop. And so I feel like that's why this one gets overshadowed a lot because we're in a franchise with 5 movies now, 6 if you want to count Bumblebee, and most of them are really, really disliked, and it happens immediately after this one. It's not like there was a good era of Transformers movies. Like you could argue there was a good era of Spider-Man movies or like a good era of Shrek movies where like 2 does not a pattern make, but it's enough for people to go like, I remember when these movies were good.
Hmm.
No, it's just I remember when we had the one good movie and everything else, yeah, everything after that was the franchise.
I see your argument there. We
Yeah.
talked over most of that scene with the two analysts, but that was I don't know that might be like one of the scenes where I get my biggest laughs out of this movie. It's just him.
Yeah. Oh, here we it like it's coming up. This is the scene that got all the laughs out of
All the laughs.
yeah.
I don't know if I mean I guess like it's relatable in a certain sense, the sense that like it is like a very human thing. But
Mhm.
like I don't know if like all of us have had like the talk with our parents, or like all of our parents have like sat down and had that discussion with us and talked to us about it. Um, but it is like kind of weird for a movie that we're selling to children to even have this kind of joke.
Yeah.
But I will say that's one of the things I kind of respect this movie for, is that almost all the humorous moments still feel real.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of slapsticky, like stop everything for a joke kind of stuff that we do in a lot of Marvel movies and in Homecoming.
Oof. Sorry.
And as I say that, there's there is a lot of that going on in this scene.
Yeah, this is one of the ones where, like I mentioned, we kind of turned it into an extended bit, like a
Yeah,
comedic bit. But here I'll say I think it works because we're kind of playing on like again tying back to how this feels a little bit like an 80s movie. We're really playing on like the kind of ET sort of like hiding the alien creature thing.
yeah, kind of like Iron Giant.
Yeah, and in those movies, we would have like an extended sequence that was like kind of juggling the comedy with the tension, and that's kind of what this is. So
Yeah,
it feels a little bit more natural than it would if in like other scenes, especially in the sequels, where it'll be like, okay, now we're real because I think it's the tension element. We're not necessarily stopping the movie for a joke.
hmm
We are making the joke part of the story as far as like
yeah. Sam is trying to keep all of them a secret, and they are making that very hard for him.
yeah, like this is this big, like unprecedented thing that just dropped into this kid's life, and how is he going to handle that? We kind of need a scene that's about that, and if you're going to play it for laughs, then alrighty then.
Um, I I do think it's really kind of cool, particularly with this first movie, just how much natural chemistry they seem to have. Like Megan Fox is obviously like your. I mean, again, I don't think she's the best actress in the world, but I don't think she's god awful either. You don't hire her to really be a character. You hire her more for her looks and just to be eye candy. But she has a lot of just natural chemistry with Shia.
Yeah, again, I don't want to too much just because I'm not even sure what her acting range is because
You
she
haven't seen her in
get
much.
not that I haven't seen her in much, but because after these movies she would get typecasted, and so
Yeah,
pretty much like,
She
m-
kind of didn't get to play anything else
yeah,
aside from Jennifer's Body,
yeah, she
which
didn't
is
get
kind of just her playing into that role.
yeah, so she didn't really get the chance to expand beyond the eye candy thing. So I can't really say that that's beyond her capabilities. But like in scenes like this, she is very much sort of like the cool, collected one who's kind of like she's keeping her head on straight as much as she can, and that plays well off of again Shia's kind of like natural intensity, and he's always a guy who seems like he's on the edge.
Yeah,
Maybe like the worst kind of temperament to be put in this situation.
yeah. He's 5 seconds away from having an anxiety attack.
Yeah.
Oh, Ratchet, what are you doing?
That just came out of nowhere.
Well, he kind of just jogged.
Yeah, exactly. What do you mean? Is she? Are we sure she's not already high?
To bring up that big joke that she does, maybe. Oh, this joke with Ratchet. Yeah, maybe we should just kill him.
Yeah, Sam's mother is interesting because like his dad, for the most part, seems like the sane one amongst them, whereas his mom is kind of like a real weirdo, and it's like really spacey. It's an interesting characterization.
Yeah, I mean, it creates a nice dichotomy between them, where like they're not. His parents aren't exactly alike. They kind of. It's not an opposites attract thing, but they are two very different people.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yep. You're ruining my youth.
And Megan Fox is like, really?
Her face.
Happy?
The dad is me. Just stop.
It's been a weird night. I've just had a little bit to drink. That comes out when you drink? If I'm your husband, I'm never letting you around alcohol.
I've seen worse.
He almost seems too casual about the fact that his yard's destroyed for as big as a deal as he makes about it.
I mean, at this point, this whole night has just been like repeated stress after stress for him. I think he's just like taking it in stride at this point.
He's like, okay. Oh, there are aliens now too? I don't even care. I'm just saying we could kill
What is this guy from?
him. He's just eager to shoot something. Oh, it's in the this movie, man. I wonder just how much of this is actually written on the page and how much of it is just okay, just riff.
I feel like a lot of that had to be riffing. Like I feel like most of this movie is on the page, like humor wise. That whole conversation, I don't know.
What's interesting about the second movie, and we'll get more into that when we talk about the second movie, but that one's written during the writer's strike,
Right,
and
yeah.
they're kind of just like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, you can tell with that one. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it involves this character,
Yeah, this guy.
whose first name will change between movies.
Uh, it's Agent Seymour Simmons, right?
I
Pretty
thought it.
sure.
I think it's not Seymour in this movie. I might be wrong. I think he's going to mention it at some point. And this movie, it's not Seymour.
That's so weird if they just change his name for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says Agent Seymour Simmons, Sector 7 or something like that.
Okay.
I always kind of like eccentric, like authority figure characters who will just charge in and completely ignoring almost every regulation in the book and just going on their own program, and all their subordinates are just rolling with it.
Even though in reality that would be incredibly terrifying,
Yeah.
here, this guy's just such a weirdo. You're gonna. Yep.
You hurt my dog, I'll kick your ass.
Yep. Yeah. He being the voice of reason.
I think the dad kind of is a more uh, a more sympathetic and engaging character than the mom. The mom is mostly just comic relief.
Yeah. That will be true in the second one. He actually has a really nice little blink and you miss it human moment in the second one that I like a lot. But yeah, they're very much a sort of odd pairing where, again, like you said, I appreciate that we didn't take like the parent characters and make them like a unit where they're interchangeable. But one of them feels like a cartoon, and one of them feels like maybe the most grounded person in the movie. Why are we laughing?
They're trying to play off like they're not sure what's going on.
Yeah.
Like aliens? The heck are aliens? We don't believe in aliens. And this is where we get that interesting backstory for Mikaela, or at least more interesting than pretty much anyone else in this movie.
Hmm. Also, I'm not gonna lie, I've been trying to like ignore it, but you can tell, especially with some of the lines like you in the training bra, these were meant for like younger or at least younger looking actors. This is still very much when we're casting like early 20 somethings as like
Well,
mid
I
early.
think Shia certainly passes for someone who could still be in high school at this point.
Yeah,
Um, Megan Fox a lot less so.
yeah.
Um, I mean, and she's early 20s. Like she doesn't look that old by any stretch of the imagination. But
No, she
um,
not that she looks old. It's just that, she's Megan Fox, and so she looks a lot more mature than you would expect from like the way that other characters are kind of talking about her and stuff. Also, hey,
um, I like that they got the original. And even though I had pretty much no experience with G1 going into this movie, but it's got to be nice for fans of the OG series that the original voice of Optimus Prime and the original voice of Megatron came back.
yeah. Actually, wait, wasn't doesn't Frank Welker come back from Megatron in the second and third ones?
I believe so. Yeah,
It's for this one. It's why am I forgetting his name? Uh,
Hugo Weaving.
yes, it's
Yeah,
Hugo.
I forgot. Yeah, Hugo. It was actually Hugo Weaving. It was just I cannot remember his name. I think it's Peter something.
Peter Cullen.
Yeah, Peter Cullen. He came back for Optimus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they got him back for Prime. Really enough, he voices Prime in all of that show, but I don't think he shows up in these movies. I think it's just Hugo Weaving the whole time. I was thinking of Prime when I said that.
in this one.
Yeah.
Leaves after this movie, and then we do get Frank Welker in, I think.
I wonder what it's been like for them playing these characters for so long.
Yeah, weird. Like the only thing weird is to also Frank Welker playing Scooby Doo and Fred for like ever and ever and ever. Also, here it is, the worst scene in this movie. Why?
He's
Why
just throwing oil on him or pissing oil on him.
pissing oil on him? I did not. Yes, I did just watch Academy Award nominated actor John Turturro get peed on by a giant robot. Not sure how I feel about this.
It's insane that that's a word we can say out loud. A sentence we can say out loud. I think that's the only joke I would cut from this movie.
Yeah, definitely.
There may be another one, and like, yeah, obviously in the world we live in, like racist jokes and misogynistic kind of jokes have certainly will make sure this movie does not age particularly well.
And then
But
gotten a couple. You could argue that he opens with one of those with the whole "we know speak Spanish" thing, but yeah,
yeah, I've never really minded that. Um, I think I don't know, like making jokes about stuff like that and being necessarily mean spirited. I don't think necessarily go hand in hand.
yeah, not me. I don't think. I think with a lot of Michael Bay's filmography, the intent is not necessarily to be mean spirited about anything, but it's usually not in good taste.
Or how can you tell a racist joke in good taste?
I don't believe you can,
Exactly.
which is why you probably just shouldn't do it.
Like racist jokes just aren't off the table. We just should never do them in film.
Eh, depends on the kind of if the film you're making is going to be deliberately like this very off color like weird thing, which this movie kind of is, but you could debate like is that what we want to do with this material?
Yeah, no, this is still very much Michael Bay's Transformers.
Yeah. Like a Michael Bay's type of movie
Yeah.
is where you put that, and like if you're someone who just can't watch Michael Bay movies for that reason, I totally sympathize.
And for better or worse, he's a filmmaker that sticks to his guns. He has a very specific style, a very specific way of how he makes movies, and um, he doesn't really compromise for anyone. He's just, yeah, this is the kind of thing that I do, and if you either like it or you don't.
Yeah. Which I mean, as has been shown, can lead to kind of a problem when it's like, yes, director's vision, but also we want to remember that these are collaborative efforts and you don't want to get like myopic about it. So
Well, the interesting thing, like having watched like the behind the scenes for all three of the first movies, he is very much a collaborative in that way. Like if someone has an idea, like let's I don't know, let's flip a chop over or something. He's like, all right, game, can we pull it off? Let's freaking do it.
yeah, movies especially like nowadays and in America are so director driven. I can see that being like a hard line to balance. I imagine that being just like a really stressful job, just as far as am I staying true to my vision while also making sure that everyone that I'm working with is sort of like, getting their say and stuff.
And it's an interesting kind of complaint that people throw around about the Marvel movies is they all kind of feel the same, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter who's directing them.
Which I think is less true of some entries than others. But that's very much again, like it's Kevin Feige's basically the director of the franchise.
Yeah.
And so if there's a vision, it's his. And you got to wonder, like, to what degree does he think about it like that? Like, how hard must it be to, like, making movies is hard. Making a movie that's even watchable is not something that most people would probably be able to do with, like, this kind of, like, huge production and budget and this many plates to, like, spin and this many balls in the air. And so to be someone like a Michael Bay or
That
a,
can not even like not crack under the pressure, but kind of thrive under the pressure.
yeah, and like you can debate the degree to which Michael Bay does it like consistently, but to like have movies that are clearly your vision and yet still people for the most part it seems like working with you and are able to sort of like also do their own thing without you being like a tyrant about it. And again, like we have behind the scenes material stuff to look at, but we don't necessarily see like every day on the set, so we can't speak.
Of course not, no. And I think what is interesting is hints of stuff that we don't necessarily see do come out. Like they do talk about how there are days where it's not the best to work with him because he is a very intense guy, and if something's not working, he's very unapologetic. But like for the most part, they all have fun making movies together. And Michael Bay, particularly with movies like this, with like big budgets and everything, he likes to work with a lot of the same crew.
Yeah,
Yeah. So like he's working with people who all like know him very very well and like keep going back to work with him. So
and like imagine imagine being Feige and how difficult that has to be, where it's like again making a passable movie is hard. Making a whole franchise of passable movies with so many different creative voices coming in, and you have to make sure that your creative voice comes in and that they all feel like they're of a piece. And like we've seen that have consequences with someone like an Edgar Wright, but like that's an exception as far as we've gotten 22 solid movies. It's like I don't think enough people realize just with franchises like that and like this one just how difficult this stuff is. And even if many people would argue that the later Transformers movies aren't passable, like that they work as movies at all and that they got made is kind of a miracle.
and particularly with Marvel, people talk about CG like someone just taps a button on a computer and that's it.
Yeah, that's the thing that Brad Bird famously said on the commentary that he did for The Incredibles, which is like people think that with computer animation, there's just like this button that you press that says "Make Movie."
It so much goes into it. So like hundreds upon hundreds of people and blood, sweat, and tears, like working on every single minute detail to bring everything together.
Yeah,
Like just I think it like Michael Bay said something to the effect of if there are four robots in a frame, it takes over 48 hours to render one frame of film. Just think about that.
yeah, that's and like I still see people like on Twitter and stuff like treating CG as if it's inherently lazier than something like this is happening right now with the Lion King remake, where I don't agree with the choice to do that movie the way that they did. I feel like it's really counterintuitive. But what grinds my gears is when you have people saying that like doing photorealistic CG like that is lazier than 2D animation. It's like, no, are you nuts? Do you know how much time and effort goes into getting it like this? Like, do I prefer it to like colorful, hand drawn animated stuff? No. I would take that any day of the week, but don't undersell the amount of work that people genuinely put into this stuff. That's just ignorant.
Yeah.
He's my advice.
This was a big like trailer fodder kind of moment.
Hmm.
Had a car turned to an alien robot.
And yeah, so now we're into the whole Act Three, bringing all of the disparate parties together to try and work together, see what they can do phase.
And we talked over the part where they were like hosing down Bumblebee. He was practical for a good portion of that since he wasn't moving. They
Including
did
that
actually build a full size Bumblebee.
including that shot where they're like wheeling him in.
Hmm. And they will later rebuild a an Optimus to be laying around in the desert for the second film.
Yep. And drop him from the helicopter.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I continue to marvel at just how good these robots look.
Yeah.
Do you have you seen the behind the scenes features for this at all?
I did see a little while of them. I haven't watched them since then though.
I have the behind the scenes for all three films posted on my YouTube channel, so you can check it out there.
Yeah, we'll link that in the description actually.
Just like what at the time we felt like endless amounts of footage and documentary stuff about how they made this movie.
Hmm.
And I'd never seen something like that before, and it it blew me away. And I'm not the big film buff that I am without this movie.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure I still would have liked movies, but just knowing how they're made, the directors, the actors, stunts, effects, all that stuff, I don't know if I would have gotten into all that stuff the way I did had I not watched the behind the scenes for this.
Yep. And down he goes. Oh, he's alive.
This is kind of our well, it's going to be a little later, but we kind of do like a fairly sizable exposition dump before we get into our third act
Yep.
because we still
Yeah.
don't like really know like the Decepticons' motivations really.
Yeah, the degree to which the Decepticons have been a really small presence up to now makes it kind of necessary.
And you don't have their leader yet. Their leader is already with the government, but on ice. So there would be no way for us to really get that exposition until now.
Which, I think they're evil for like what they're doing as far as again, we're really building to the Decepticons show up and like specifically Megatron. And like we'll
Yeah.
get to this as far as a bit as far as the actual the way we tie that up, the way that we sort of execute our big Megatron v Optimus 1v1 thing that I have issues with. But this movie's really smart about making you wait for Optimus, making you wait for Megatron, and then it's building and building and building to the moment where they clash one on one.
Um, and I have mixed feelings about that as well. I don't know if it's for the same reasons you do.
You can bring them up when we get to them, unless one of them's already come up.
Okay. Um, yeah, it's that's we'll save that for when we get to it. I think this set is pretty insane, and they built the legs and threw in the torso and everything upwards with CG.
Yeah, and like we mentioned, that Megatron landed in 1935, and now all I can think about is, wouldn't it be cool to do a movie with Transformers in 1935?
uh, like a little movie that we may have gotten last year.
except more 30-ish.
Yeah.
Which, assuming we do like get through all of these, you want to include that one also, right?
I don't know if there's enough in that movie for me to be able to talk about it for its whole runtime. I
Okay.
just know that I didn't particularly. I mean, it's fine. Um, for all this movie's flaws, it's not even as enjoyable as this movie.
Hmm.
I feel.
Ice baby.
Have you seen Bumblebee yet?
No, I planned to see it, and then stuff kept getting in the way until eventually it was out of theaters, and then I just kind of forgot about it. It seemed to be the case for a lot of people because it didn't make a ton.
No, it did not. But I think that has less to do with like just personal stuff getting in the way with people because if a movie has the buzz, it can kind of cut through all that. Like
Yeah, it kind of came out. The general consensus, I think, was yeah,
it's the best Transformers movie. It's better than all the other ones. This is what we should have got to begin with. And I'm like, I kind of don't know what you guys are talking about. I mean, I get that you don't that like that there's racist jokes and misogynistic jokes and we're objectifying women, all that good stuff. But just even as a movie, like I don't feel like it's all that better than this.
uh,
Really.
just going off of and again,
Like it seemed like people were like they purely liked it for the superficial reasons of we're doing the classic aesthetic and we're doing another 80s throwback and there's no misogynistic or racist jokes. That those are all the boxes that movie needed to check apparently. So it's
having having that, and again, not wanting totally like partial to this movie just because I don't know how much of it is our discussion. I will say I think this movie is starting to slow down around now. Like
yeah,
this
because we
this
are.
this whole middle, I want to say like 30,
It's
40, 50 minutes, everything like past Simmons kind of coming in, I think has been slowly kind of like slowing a bit compared to all of the being introduced to the Transformers stuff. That said, I I don't know how I'm gonna feel like when this movie ends in still 42 minutes to go, but I think this is proving to be a very solid movie. But I think with the sequels, it's just a matter of on top of what you listed with like the off-color humor and the racism and the objectification and stuff. I think it's also what we mentioned a bit earlier of Sam being a really hard character to get behind as these movies progress and he kind of like fails to grow. And the same can be kind of said for Cade Yeager when he eventually takes over. Like all that stuff, I think can be forgiven. It might be difficult for some people, but it can be forgiven if you've got like a really compelling narrative with your central protagonist. And we don't really get that in the sequels. And I think some people feel like we got that with Bumblebee. But I was going to say the consensus I'd heard with Bumblebee at the time was maybe the best Transformers movie, way more of a pleasant viewing experience than the Michael Bay movies, and yet that's not saying much. And,
not really no.
and so I don't think that even that's kind of like damning it with faint praise, where even that having been said would not like we'd gotten to a point with this franchise where best Transformers movie wasn't high enough praise to sell people, and
No.
that's fortunate.
Which again is for all those reasons I stated is why people actually think that's a good movie because I don't I have a hard time saying it's better than this by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, when I'll see how I feel about it. Right now, I feel like this movie is a very solid movie that right now is kind of going through a bit of a lull.
Yeah, because we do kind of take a while to push through all this exposition.
Hmm.
Well, but which is, I guess, kind of nice because you don't want to just rush it.
Yeah, no, again, because
Yeah, let's just rush it and like give you all the major beats so we can just skip ahead to our big action climax. We are still trying to make a movie and tell a full story.
yeah, and again, trying to build anticipation for the action. Where again, this is Avengers again would sort of adopt this same approach where that movie's not really a big blowout action movie until the climax. And up to that point, we're kind of building and building and building and getting the audience to be like, all right, I can't wait until we get to that part.
And that movie, it really is focused more on story instead of action because for your second major action scene, you have Iron Man fixing a propeller instead of fighting anyone. Like that is clearly a yeah, we're just confident enough in our story to do that.
Yeah. And like, we're confident enough that we can do action beats that are not just like punching contests.
And I do think there's actually some wonderful dramatic tension in the climax of this movie.
Hmm.
I like the mask thing. I think that's really cool. Maybe it's just my love for superheroes and that kind of aesthetic, but I dig the kind of battle mask that Bumblebee has.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you played the games for any of these movies, but me and my brother also played the video game that they made for this film on PS2 kind of religiously when
Hmm.
this came out.
I not play.
And it was kind of like really fun, almost addicting. Like it was almost Grand Theft Auto Transformers. Like you could, even if you were an Autobot, you could kind of just run around and just blow up buildings,
Yeah,
and you could
thank
fight
you.
other robots, and that was always really fun. And you could pick up cars and throw them. That was a fun little game.
Thank you for letting us know that he's doing something. Yep, this is very
And that's where CinemaSins goes. You earned that paycheck, Tyrese.
vital commentary.
And the score for that little bit was beautiful.
Yeah.
I can't pronounce his last name. I know his first name is Steve, but the composer for all three of these movies, they use the same one, and he's so great.
Hmm. I'll have to look into that later.
Anything's possible. You see that? Yeah, we got to get him. We got to get the Tesseract to a city and then hand it off to the Air Force.
Whoa. For a couple of seconds, there was a shot in this movie that wasn't primarily blue and or orange.
um, color palette is a thing that I have taken more notice of, like in more recent years. Now that we keep making a big deal out of that, but it's not really something I've paid attention to all that much with these movies.
I don't know. It stuck out to me not like a good or bad way, just as far as like that's kind of these movies' aesthetic.
Yeah, there is a lot of James Cameron blue filter that Michael Bay likes to use for these, which I think fits for his take on this material.
Yeah.
That's a really cool shot.
Yeah.
I think Megatron has a solid menacing voice. Um, I don't know how I feel about him like slowly saying his own name occasionally. That feels a little weird.
I forget. that. Also, we talked over the line from Scream. Nice to have around Starscream.
Yeah, Starscream is one of my favorite like villain lackeys.
Simmons, what are you, an idiot?
Like we capitalize him a lot in the Prime show, but I love his little like ongoing dynamic with Megatron and like he secretly wants to be the leader. They don't really do that in these movies, um, but Starscream's kind of one of my favorite second in command kind of antagonist characters.
Yeah, especially as like, the guys that we keep pulling over from G1 goes, Starscream was always kind of like the most complicated and the most interesting, even insofar as he was kind of a petty little snot. Whereas like he's he's the guy whose allegiance is always changing because he has his only allegiance is to himself, and that's remained true for most incarnations. And I don't know, like the handling of him is sort of a weird thing in these movies where it's very much it means something to you if you're already a Transformers fan and you know him. If
Yeah,
you primarily know this franchise through these movies, then he's just kind of a weird little thing that keeps popping up.
yeah, he's kind of just there. And with as much focus as they're putting on the humans, you don't really have time to delve into a relationship with him and Megatron or any of the other Decepticons, really.
Which is again, I imagine something that fans would want, or like if I were to do that, would want to expand in sequels. Whereas like, okay, we'll have a little line about it here, and it creates this kind of curiosity. Is like, okay, what are they talking about? Like, he failed me again. Like, what's the relationship there? And then you can expand on that later, but then we keep going and going and going, and it never really amounts to anything.
We haven't really talked a lot about the sound design, but like the sound of them transforming is also super cool.
Yep. Again, it's one of those things that blockbusters after this movie will kind of just keep building on and sort of like taking as like, okay, we're really going to put an effort into making things sound real, and like all of these really like over the top like
Oh,
giant robots, like these fantastical things, we're going to make them sound kind of tangible.
wait for it.
uh
This scene, there's a big like effect shot. This bus, they actually blew up that bus.
yeah. Yeah, wanton destruction and violence, I love it. Get him, get him.
And another interesting thing about Michael Bay, I don't know if this is true of most filmmakers, but they make a pretty big deal, I think, in the behind the scenes for this very first film, that Michael Bay is one of those directors that yeah, he collaborates and he lets people like put their 2 cents in, and so some stuff will obviously be different, but for the most part, he already has the film in his head before he even gets his hands on a camera.
Yeah,
He has the whole film, almost every shot mapped out in his head already.
I wish I was that lucky.
That kind of sounds like yeah, just a pure like natural talent thing.
Yeah.
Which is another thing I do appreciate about him. Like he's one of the most confident filmmakers I can think of.
Yeah, one thing you can say about Michael Bay is that there's no artifice about him. He knows what he wants to do and he does it.
Yeah. Whether you like that or not is something else entirely, but he's gonna do what he's gonna do.
Mm.
This is kind of fun.
Yeah,
Did you ever pick up on that he says "oh shit" here, like without the subtitle?
I believe I did. I think so. I think that's something that my class picked up on when we watched it.
I didn't catch that on like the first 2 3 viewings, um, but eventually I did, and then I turned on subtitles just to make sure. I was like, that's really funny.
Ah, keep the camera still for 5 seconds, please.
I don't feel like this movie is too horribly shaky cammy, but it's a movie, but I never feel like the camera's too close or I can't tell what's going on.
Yeah, I
That's
think
never an issue I've had, and it's really, I think, the most bizarre and unfounded complaint people throw at these movies.
I don't know. Call it on. I just guess most people have more difficulty than you do with that, but I don't know. I do think whether or not it's like shaky cam or whatever, there's again like in keeping with Michael Bay being very much like he's
They
putting.
have to actually lift this bus up and explode this. Like pretty much everything he does in the action throughout this film is all real, with the exception of the Transformers.
Yeah. Wait a minute. What even? Oh. Huh. But yeah, I was gonna say it's just kind of like a quirk of Michael Bay's filmography is that he really doesn't like static shots of any kind. Like
No,
whether it's shaky cam or whatever, or like a pan or a
yeah,
zoom.
the camera's almost always moving.
Yeah. And he really likes his 360 shots also.
Hmm.
And like I know some people for whom that's a problem, where it's like if you don't have any static shots in your movie, that can make it kind of hard to absorb information, where it's like, okay, my focus is always being pulled in some direction, and it's rarely the same direction between shots. Thankfully, that's not the case with this movie. This movie is really good with sort of like the continuity of where the audience's eye is supposed to be at any given moment. But there's a lot of moments, I think, especially in the third one, there might even be in the second one, where it's like just from shot to shot, where on the screen your eye is supposed to be changes in like an instant. And I think that maybe contributes to the problem that we're talking about, where some people just cannot acclimate to that quickly enough, and that makes action hard to digest for them.
I don't know if I have that, but we'll see. Going through the later films.
I don't think I have that, or at least not nearly as badly, but I can see that being an issue for people.
Um, I think the scene here is really strong. Bumblebee's just gotten his legs blown off, and there's a lot of really well done emotion conveyed in this scene with just these two making eye
Yeah.
contact. And Sam has to step up and, like, he's throughout this movie he's been very kind of scatterbrained and timid and fearful, and he's got to run head on into a gigantic Transformers fight and um get the cube from point A to
He's
B.
got a useful for
That shot is unintentionally hilarious.
everything Jazz is intentionally funny because he's just so small.
Yeah, like that Decepticon just like taking Zaz off of his shoulder and throwing him is just so. Like I laugh almost every time I see that. I don't know why.
It's just because like we're finally getting into like Autobot versus Decepticon action, and he's like, "Come on, Decepticon punk," and he jumps on him, and the guy is just like, "Get off!"
Now, since Megatron's showing up here, I'm gonna go ahead and get into my kind of big issue with him and Optimus in this movie.
You might have
Um,
just talked over him saying his own name. I don't know.
yeah, he said it.
Okay.
Megatron.
Wow,
It's so weird.
why is
Like,
he
why?
doing that?
Why are you saying your own name? And it's something that he only does in this movie. Thankfully, he doesn't keep doing it in the other movies.
Yeah, that's really odd.
It makes him feel like less like a sentient being and more just like a creature.
Yeah, especially since we haven't really characterized him beyond just being like evil. Oh boy, you want a piece of me? You want a piece of me? No, I want two pieces.
It's so cheesy, and that's why it's funny.
My friend, who I was just hanging out with last week, actually, he would quote that line to me all the time in middle school. And it was funny because he was the shortest of all of us.
Um, Something we haven't talked about yet. I mean, I get it with Bumblebee now because he's like all battle damaged and everything, but almost all the time, like um, the robots like have all these interesting like scratches and cuts and and then they transform into like very pristine, clean cars, and you kind of don't buy that dirty like rundown. Well, not rundown, but just like all the scratches and cuts and stuff. You don't buy that same robot transforms into like a perfectly clean car that you would see in a commercial. Like we kind of went too far the other direction with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because like in the behind the scenes, they talk about how they do all that stuff to them to make them look interesting. Like so they're not just like these clean, pristine robots.
Yeah,
It would make them feel a little more
I don't
artificial.
know. I personally find that necessary, even where it's like, yes, once they start like really getting into it and like fighting each other and stuff, it would only make sense that they sustain that kind of damage. But like, if you're not gonna be consistent with it on that level, I don't think any. Again, it's one of those things where I don't think anyone would mind if they didn't have battle damage. It's a nice touch when they're not in vehicle form to have that.
Yeah,
But if they didn't do it, I don't think anyone would like notice its absence.
yeah, that's fair. But it is super cool to think that they were thinking of the realism like on that level.
Yeah. Maybe it's just that for as sort of like complicated as the actual Cybertronian designs are,
This is one of my favorite shots in the whole movie.
yeah, this is great. But yeah, see, like as complicated as this is, maybe they're just thinking that like mapping the battle damage from the Cybertronian body back onto the vehicle would be too complicated to be worth the time. I
Yeah,
see that. Get them,
and you want the cars to look nice for product placement.
yeah. And see, here we are. It's finally time.
Okay, I want to get into my
On
big complaint with
1v1.
them.
Okay, yeah, get into it.
So we also do this in Transformers Animated. I don't particularly care for that show, I think it came out either right before or right around these movies. This first one, at least. Um, I like Megatron and Optimus Prime are supposed to be the never-ending stalemate, kind of like Professor Xavier and Magneto, like the two people who were, well, the two beings that were like former friends who have like vastly different, well, not vastly different, but significantly different ideologies, and they kind of have like this never-ending conflict, this stalemate. Like Megatron is basically just kicking his ass the whole
Yeah,
fight.
that's
It doesn't feel like two like evened out mono people fighting. Megatron's just beating the snot out of him for this whole climax.
yeah. Megatron is really dominating this fight, and I think that same problem carries into the dialogue. Where, again, this is Transformers. It's not necessarily X-Men. Other adaptations will have that kind of complicated level to their relationship and like their dynamic. But right now, they really are just kind of like throwing declarative statements at each other. And it's a very sort of generic good guy versus bad guy with them. And so if you're not going to have that in the dialogue, then you should at least have it in the way that the fight plays out,
Yeah,
being like really a trading of blows. But you're right, it's really kind of like they
it's so one-sided.
yeah, they trade a couple of blows. Megatron clearly has the upper hand. Optimus is incapacitated, and then we mainly focus on Sam. Oh God,
Oh.
steering wheel face hugger. I didn't need that. I also didn't need to literally be assaulted with Mountain Dews. Thank you very much.
Just hitting people with cans of Mountain Dew. I think he says huzzah. That's really funny. Like, Megatron is such a weird quagmire in this movie.
I feel like that was just supposed to be like a animalistic growl. I
Yeah.
don't know.
It's weird. Like with some viewings, it plays as animalistic, and other viewings, it kind of sounds like he's saying huzzah. I found you, boy. And you're like, what? I love this scene. We basically team up Mikaela with Bumblebee, and this is kind of where that statement you made earlier. Maybe we should have made the movie about her.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should have. I think this moment is even stronger if you do that.
Yeah. And I think there would be an easy enough way to like conflate what she's doing with like taking around the Allspark stuff, so that we don't have to cut between as many things.
Yeah, like maybe she like has it in the passenger seat, and Bumblebee is shooting all the Decepticons trying to get to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this movie is a little bit tighter, a little bit better structurally if she's the main character.
And it would have been interesting seeing like the whole romance play out from her perspective if you were still gonna have Sam.
Yeah, I wonder, with sort of like as ineffectual as he is up to this point, and if we give her the cube thing, then does he like even have a reason to be around?
Yeah. Once you start rewriting the movie on that level, it's almost you kind of don't need Sam or
Yeah.
even much of a love story in this movie.
Yeah, and like I get what the movie's trying to do, where
It
like,
wants to be, boy gets car, boy gets girl.
but I just mean like as far as Sam not having anything to do until this point, where we give him something to do, and that's supposed to be like his growth, where he has suddenly a responsibility thrust on him, and can he do it? It's just the way that plays out, and with the cast being this big, and again with this movie nominally being more about the Transformers, it seems like Sam is just kind of, he's the audience surrogate who's like the audience's eyes in,
Mm-hmm.
but plot wise he really isn't doing anything at all until this moment, and so his role already seems kind of shoehorned.
Which is weird, given that they wanted to make this, the boy gets car, boy gets girl thing.
Oh no.
Oh, that's kind of mortifying.
If I'm right, both in this movie and in the sequel, Shia LaBeouf actually like injures himself doing stunts.
Yeah, I believe he injures himself in the second film, but I'm not sure exactly what that's about. I think he hurts his hand.
Yeah, and that's like write that into the movie that he.
Yeah, they wrote it into the movie. I'm pretty sure. Michael Bay actually like had him walk out on that,
Yep.
and like had wires on him.
Yeah.
Yep. Like there's a little safety net that they like digitally removed, and and he's just hanging on wires, hoping for dear life that he does not slip. Yeah, you got to commend him. Like I feel like the average director just puts that on a green screen stage.
Yeah. And down he goes.
This little bit here is kind of cool. Yeah, he's like grinding down against the buildings to like slow down his momentum, but then Megatron knocks him off and he just falls.
Yep. There they go. Which, and like even more so than just the fight between him and Megatron being one-sided, like you can have it be where there is a clearly stronger one among the two of them, and I guess it makes sense for that to be Megatron, but I also just think it's an issue of this scene is almost over, and it feels like they've barely fought each other at all.
Kinda, yeah. I mean, it was basically just, Megatron like blasting him and then hitting him, and yeah, he's kind of out of commission until he saves Sam.
Yeah, like
We're gonna see Megatron continue to beat the snot out of him a little more here.
yeah.
Yeah, they know they haven't had enough of that, so they're giving it a little more here.
Also, that's a big mistake. Not having the camera be on Optimus when he says the one shall stand, one shall fall line. Big mistake.
Yeah, I would have thought he'd do one of his signature like low angle, like heroic shots
Yeah, that I feel like just
with
highlight.
like the sun silhouette behind him or something.
Yeah, that I feel like the more I talk about it, the more I'm even like really adamant that we should have had Sam just maybe not even be in this movie, because we can do the Mikaela stuff where she sort of like completes an arc and gets to have her moment with Bumblebee, and that's a like give connect her to Bumblebee, and that moment resonates harder, like you said. And then once that's out of the way, we can let the climax mostly be about Optimus versus Megatron, and that can get the weight that it kind of feels like it's lacking right now, because we're focusing so much on Sam and we're getting so little like real cathartic Optimus versus Megatron stuff.
Yeah, especially because if you're not a Transformers fan, um, like outside of this franchise, you don't really know their relationship. They're just kind of good guy, bad guy.
Yeah,
And
this
Sam is
could have
just a
been.
spectator who doesn't really know either of them that well.
Yeah, and like you don't come out of this movie feeling like they're more than good guy, bad guy. And like we'll keep bringing Megatron back in the sequels, and just because he keeps showing up, I guess
Yeah,
you
he's
get the
kind of
sense.
like the villain, and they can't figure out like. Well, I mean, the Transformers have a fair amount of other villains that we see in Prime, but none of them are ever brought into these movies, or at least a good bit of them are not.
That was cool.
That was
The
yeah, that was a
slide.
pretty sick scene.
Yeah. But yeah, like, see, yeah, he's just kicking him around. And it's like, okay, we can get to this point eventually after like a couple of minutes of them like fighting more evenly. And it just feels like, I don't know, like, I'm trying to imagine like the world where this doesn't necessarily get any sequels and we just have to live with this as the live action Transformers movie. And especially in hindsight, you would definitely be super disappointed if this was all we got and Optimus fights Megatron and it comes out like this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially like now having had Prime, which is in my opinion like the definitive like best Transformers show ever made.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't say the best show, but definitely my favorite because I haven't seen a lot of Generation One,
Agreed.
really any of it. But I love Prime, and
Uh-huh.
like those are some of the best action scenes I've seen in any cartoon series.
And again, okay, so uh, how do I put this? So much of what I think has been working about the movie up to this point has been the slow build up
Mm-hmm.
and like the slowly building Megatron, and to have I think it maybe retroactively harms the earlier parts of the movie a little bit, not to the point of like breaking it because it's still very atmospheric and well directed and well paced and stuff, but it kind of like takes some of the air out of what I was enjoying up to this point, that it's like, okay, Megatron's not really a character, and we really don't get anything interesting of him until right we just killed him, and I feel like I don't know anything about him. We didn't really get to see him do anything all that impressive. He just kicked Optimus around for a little bit, and I don't know. I feel like this movie kind of gets way less solid in this second half.
Um, yeah, minus some of the solid action bits that have nothing to do with Megatron. I kind of agree with you.
Yeah, like
Like the most compelling like action sequence to me in this movie is Bumblebee and Mikaela on that truck.
yeah,
like I don't want to get mean. I'm trying really hard not to make it sound mean because I do think this is for the most part a really solid movie.
Yeah.
But like if I watch Bumblebee and I like it more than this, I'm not going to be surprised necessarily.
Um, do you care about spoilers at all for that?
Not really.
Um,
Although, did spoiler warning in case anyone listening to this does. So
okay. Spoiler warning for Bumblebee. Bumblebee is not really a character in that movie almost at all. Like he's a character fighting the war with Optimus and Cybertron, and then he gets he winds up on Earth, and we do the Captain Marvel thing where he loses his memory, and he's kind of just a child slash kind of pet. Like he's kind of just a pet for a lot of that movie.
yeah, and that's not even necessarily a spoiler insofar as it's kind of what they sold it on. I think that's the vibe that I think everyone kind of got from the marketing.
Yeah, and so but Bumblebee in this, like even though he can't talk, he's using the radio to communicate, and he doesn't feel like a dog or like a little baby.
To what degree do you think maybe it's just even with the radio at hand, the writers or the director, whoever thinks that it's just a bit too difficult to.
Like I'm kind of shocked that I buy this as much as I do. Like them ending up together.
I don't know. I don't not buy it, and yet at the same time, watching this movie, I don't necessarily need them to get together at the end.
I don't either.
Yeah, like I feel like you could end this with them just being really close friends, and it would feel just as natural. But yeah, like I don't have any complaints about them being together.
I don't either. I think like all the substantial complaints you could possibly have with that come from the second movie.
Yeah, yeah, when we get into that, that's gonna be a lot of. Again, it's again we keep making this comparison, but it reminds me of the Maguire movies and the romance there, where it's like when they're kind of pining for each other and sort of dancing around each other and not officially together in film one, that I find to be really interesting. But it's when we kind of nudge them closer to being together in movie two and get them together in movie three, where it's like, oh, you didn't actually know what you wanted to do with the two of them together, and so you just immediately toss them into really annoying melodrama stuff.
Yeah,
And also, this song, after this movie, this song was everywhere.
everywhere.
You could not escape it.
And Lincoln Park, I think they've had quite the fruitful rise in fandom and popularity because of these movies.
Yeah. But
I know they had a track for the second and third one.
that, that 1 second. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Oh, we got it. My mother's gonna lock it.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. But movie's over, so final thoughts?
Final thoughts? Yeah, it was an interesting experience to go back to this and talk with you about it, man. Uh, again, I don't feel like anyone will really care about this, but I just thought it was a fun thing for you and me to do.
Yeah, I'm actually. We don't like jump straight to it, but I am interested to like do at least the second one. Maybe not the third, fourth, and fifth ones, but I feel like the second one, building on this, I would also be interested to try at some point.
We got to do the third one because that's like as much as I understand why people kind of hate Sam's character because of that movie. I love the third one too, and I'm not going to say it's necessarily better than this, but I think it is the most enjoyable, at least for me, and I have gone back to that one more so than any other film in the franchise.
Not gone back to most of them. If I was gonna go back to any of them consistently, it would probably be this one. But I don't know, like I feel like
I'm coming out of this one feeling about the way that I've always felt about it, which is it's as a first outing, it makes a lot of choices that I can co-sign and get behind. It's mostly really solid, and yet when it becomes like, a Michael Bay kind of like explosiony action movie is when it stops being as interesting. And I can totally understand maybe why this one and sort of like the good qualities of it get lost in the shuffle when talking about this franchise.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
But yeah, I'm glad I sat down with it again. I do think that there are a lot of solid elements to it. And yeah, this was good. I'm glad we did this. I apologize for all of the background noise. That stuff is beyond my control, unfortunately.
All right, guys. Not sure when we'll get around to the second one, but this was fun. We will see you later.
All right, thanks for listening. And, as usual, let us know what you think about this movie in the comments. If you watched along, how did the commentary play for you guys? And thank you so much.